Hello and welcome to the Back Nine Report. My name is Carlos Torres and I'm glad to be back here with Fred Alvader. We're going to have a special discussion today about what's been happening with LIV and the PGA Tour and the DP World Tour merger. Fred, hi, how are you today?
Carlos, I'm fantastic. Been traveling a little bit around Ohio and Michigan and playing a little golf, and the weather's been great, and it's all good stuff, man.
Don't you want some sun and some heat? We have some 114 degrees here. We can give you some. It's melting everything. I mean, it's awesome. I mean,
I hate to tell you, but it was down in the 40s last night. The ferns kicked on.
Don't say those things. Don't say those things. I don't know why.
Had a sweatshirt on this morning. It was cool.
No, I can't do this. I can't do this. Anyway, Fred, it keeps getting hotter and hotter, like the temperature here. What's going on between the proposed merger between the PGA Tour and the PIF, right? The LIV Tour and also the DP World Tour. And just to give everybody a background of what's going on, June 6, just 22 days ago, it was announced that there was going to be a merger between what is the Saudi Arabia Public Investment Fund, basically the ones that started LIV, and the PGA Tour and the DP World Tour. That was announced by Jay Monahan, who recently has been, down with his sickness. He's bad in his health, but in the meantime, Jimmy Dunn and Harley have been running the day-to-day operations. But it is being proposed. The things that we know is that the PGA Tour so far, it will retain some controlling powers over the new entity, which so far is referred to as NewCo. Okay, we know that Yasir Al Rumayyan, who is the chair of the board of that new entity, he's coming from the PIF also. Jay Monahan is going to be the CEO of this new venture that's going to apparently unify all three tours in just one entity. We still don't know, and that's what we're going to talk about. What do we expect that is going to be happening? The players, of course, and the PGA Tour are very angry at this because everything was done behind doors. For 2 months, Jay Monahan was working on this behind closed doors to try to get this. We understand this is something that if would have been public, would have never even get off the ground. We know that so far there is a framework in place to get the LIV players to get back to the PGA Tour. At least that's not going to happen this year. It would be starting next year, but still it's a little fussy, right? There's consequences for the players that stayed on the PGA Tour. They took a business decision to stay and be faithful to the PGA Tour. But now what's going to happen? They didn't take all that money. So we're going to have to discuss on what's going to happen with that. And finally, we know there was this alleged attempt by Patrick Cantlay to maybe revolve the players against Monahan, maybe dethrone him, some sort of a coup. We know because there was a 5-hour meeting ahead of the Rocket Mortgage. The policy board was meeting, and there's a leaked document because in July 11, Congress and the Department of Justice are trying to do some findings about this. And there's some, and I find it interesting, Fred, because it's anti-monopolistic policies, but that was what the lawsuit was about before. So there's a lot to talk about. Brandon Chambly says, 3 of the 5 players on that policy board have to approve it. He says, and this is him, he says not likely to happen. But Fred, initially, what's your take on all this those rumblings that have been happening so far?
Well, June 6th is certainly a day that will live in infamy forever. That was the day of the announcement, June 6th. And so you mentioned the players maybe are having a mini revolt or something, and Patrick Cantlay seems to be leading that. And as you mentioned, Cantlay is one of the player representatives on the PGA Tour board of directors. There are 5 players on that board: Cantlay, Charlie Hoffman, Peter Malnati, Rory McIlroy, Webb Simpson. Of those players, Brandon Chambly says that they need 3 of those 5 to approve this merger. Chambly says he doesn't think 3 out of the 5 will approve it. And we know Cantley's not for it. So that leaves, 4 more to figure out what they're going to do. Rory's always taken the side of the PGA Tour, but he felt betrayed at this whole thing. So maybe he's going to change his mind too. I don't know. And as you mentioned, then there are 5 non-playing directors, which are Ed Hurley, Jimmy Dunn, Mark Flaherty, Mary Meeker, Randy Stevenson. And these guys are all like investment guys, former CEOs of large companies and those kind of things, right? So they're true businessmen, and they're looking at it from a business standpoint. So there are some things here that like you said, we know, right? We know that there's still a lot to be decided. I mean, they did this thing in a hurry, so that nothing is really, maybe etched in stone. There's still a lot of stuff that are being bargained in good faith. The PGA Tour Policy Board is going to have an 11th member. They're going to have Al Rahmanian as a board member on the PGA Tour Policy Board. So there'll be 5 business directors, there'll be 5 player directors, and then the PIF guy, Yasser Al Rahmanian. And then the PIF is going to be a sponsor of a tournament someplace. They already have the big Saudi International, but they're going to put money in for their own tournament. One of the keys in this whole thing, Carlos, is how to get the LIV guys world ranking points. And that's supposed to be negotiated through this whole thing too. The LIV guys, even if the LIV stays in business and keeps operating, they'll be able to earn world ranking points. So although LIV future is a little bit unclear, there hasn't been a lot said about that yet. Greg Norman is telling everybody, just go on about business as usual. We're going to be around. Our schedule already set for 2024. Let's keep going. So there's a lot of stuff in here, Carlos. And my take on this is that I really don't know what's going to happen. I mean, there's just so much stuff. And I thought from the beginning, we talked about this back at the beginning of the month when you were on, that, the players aren't necessarily in favor of this thing. The guys that stayed true to the PGA Tour, now the LIV guys that took the money and ran and said all kinds of bad things about the tour, now they're going to get to come back and play like nothing's happened. Yeah, there's going to be some play-in requirements and some stuff they're going to have to do. They're going to have to say some Hail Marys and, make atonement and all that kind of thing, kiss Monahan's ring or something. But there is a way for them to come back in the tour beginning next year, according to all the information that we have so far. So, Carlos, there's still a lot going on, and where there's smoke, there's fire. My mom always told me that, and I believe it today. And there's a lot of smoke in this thing. So maybe that's where all this smoke is coming from up here that we've got in this atmosphere. It's coming from the PGA Tour LIV merger deal.
Yeah, I think it started there in Canada for somehow, right? It's where all that.
Yeah, it's blown in here.
It's blowing, and but yeah, no, it's incredible. And let's get started with that, right? One of the questions that we have is, can the PGA Tour continue to thrive under this new agreement? What's going to happen with LIV? Like you mentioned, there's still a lot of things, and under the 7 points that we can say of that leaked document, because of course it's coming, they have to start publishing this because ahead of that Congress hearing, we know for sure that the PGA Tour will be in power. So being that Jay Monahan and he will have the ultimate decisions, he will remain as a commissioner, plus he's going to have his 2 big guys there on the board. It is ensuring that anything that's going to happen, the PGA Tour is going to take control. And we know that they have said already, it's very unlikely that the LIV will remain. That's as per Jay Monahan's own words. So in that case, maybe at least for a year, if Greg Norman is saying this, is because, of course, there hasn't been any ratifications of what they say are going to be the definitive agreements. There's a framework in place, but they still have to put everything else as definitive agreements for this to happen. So even though, as we're speaking right now, we can't say that this is something that is set in stone, that it will go on and this is going to happen. There's still a lot of things that are going to happen, but can the PGA Tour continue to thrive on this, the new agreement, Fred? My belief is yes. is going to even be more stronger because there won't be any more talk about a runaway tour. They can actually concentrate on golf for once. For the past 3 years, they really haven't been doing that, and embrace really what's going to come. Now, what's your take on it?
Monahan has said that the PGA Tour could not continue to exist and do business as they were doing it with the increased purses that they're playing and paying out all these big legal fees for all the lawsuits that were going on with the LIV. That was the impetus for this merger, to cut the costs. As we know, purses are up 30% across the board on the PGA Tour. That's got to come from somewhere. Yes, the PGA Tour is sitting on a lot of money, but you start paying out 10 million here and 20 million there, all of a sudden you're talking about real money, right? So that was the reason that they did this. Now, if the PGA Tour is really in control of this thing with Monahan as CEO, 2 of his guys on the board, and the PIF just putting the money in, Carlos, I come back to the golden rule. He who has the gold rules. And so if the PIF's putting the money in and they get mad about something, decide to pull the money out, where does that leave the PGA Tour? So, yes, we have seen that they can continue to do business, but Monahan said they can't do business the way they've been doing it. It's got to change a little bit. So that was the reason for all this. Can they continue now that they don't have to compete against the LIV? The LIV is not allowed to take their players. They're not going to recruit anymore. They can do what they're doing already. And as we said, they've already set their schedule for next year. But can the PGA Tour continue as they've been doing? Yes, they can, as long as they don't have to pay those big legal fees. And if they don't have to pay bigger purses than they're already paying.
Well, next question would be something that we already talked about, and that Brandon Chambly says it's not going to happen. Would it really be accepted and agreed upon by the PGA Tour members? That's the bigger question. To me, the way that I see it is, Rory McIlroy has been the flag bearer on all this time for the PGA Tour. He said he felt betrayed. John Ram was another player that was also very vocal. And I think those two might be the most influential players right now on the PGA Tour's side. But the way I see them is I haven't seen them as vocal after the agreement was announced. We did hear Patrick Cantlay, but we really, and anybody that you hear talking right now against this is not actually an influential player that could sway the opinions of the players one way or the other. We see the lower players right now being the ones making the most noise because they're the ones that are going to be most affected. By accepting all these players back, they go down again. So if really Rory McIlroy and John Ram and others on top that have been talked about, they seem like resigned with the fact that this is going to happen. Otherwise, they would continue and would go against it. And let's say they would be the ones really rolling the ball against Jay Monahan and company to take them out. This is not happening. We're the players. We're the ones who say what's going to happen. No, it's not going to. I haven't seen that. Until I see that, I actually think this is going to get approved by the PGA Tour players.
So Cantley's feeling is that he loses leverage. If the LIV goes away, if this merger goes through and the LIV eventually goes away, he's lost an opportunity to bargain in his business. And he was bargaining. Patrick Cantlay and Xander Schauffele were working really hard and thinking very seriously about taking the LIV money and moving. They were very close to doing it, and they were offered big money to do it. And so Cantley's feeling is that if the merger goes through the way they've talked about it, LIV is going to go away and he loses an opportunity, a bargaining chip, as it were. So is that a good point? Yeah, from a business standpoint, he is correct. But long term, if the PGA Tour is more stable, won't that help him long term? Okay. And maybe somebody can sell that idea to him. I'm not sure. I'm sure somebody's been in his ear, but he appears to be leading this mini revolt against this merger and against Jay Monahan.
Yeah, those five, if three have to be, Of course, for now, it seems like he's the one that is gonna say no. Now, who's gonna be the other twos that are gonna be blocking this? Because I actually believe Rory and Webb are gonna go for it. Those two for sure. Now it would be up to Charlie Hoffman and Peter Malnati to see which one of them will be that third deciding vote. But I actually think it's gonna
And I
happen.
don't think, I don't think it affects either one of those guys, Hoffman or Malnati. I just don't think it affects them. Malnati's always been kind of a fringe PGA Tour guy, right? He's in the top 125. He's out of the top 125. Bounces back and forth. He plays good a couple of weeks, and you don't see him for 6 months. Charlie Hoffman is at the point where he's getting ready for the senior tour. So, he's not going to be around that much longer. And so these guys have to be looking for the good of the tour 10, 15, 25 years from now. Does this play out to be the best thing for the tour long term?
In that case, and I would say they are gonna vote for it because they're gonna have to, they're looking after their progress and their future right now. And that's what it's gonna be down to. Definitely, I do see it happening. Now, is there a conspiracy really to dethrone Monahan and reject this agreement like we've been hearing?
There obviously was, and Cantley was the leader of that. I don't know, it might have lost steam. This 5-hour meeting, I haven't seen any reports out of that meeting. Everybody seems to be being pretty tight-lipped so far. Evidently, there was a lot of stuff aired in that, because 5 hours is a long time for PGA Tour players to be sit. And Rory even flew in for the meeting, right?
And he wasn't playing.
Yeah, he wasn't playing Detroit. He flew in to Detroit just for the meeting. So, it was pretty important, evidently. And, where does Monahan play out on all stuff? I mean, all of a sudden he's on a medical leave. Nobody's saying what's exactly wrong with him. He has had some issues in the past, but, it's never kept him away from working. All of a sudden he's completely out of the picture. So are they saying, hey, you're too close to this? We want to decide all this without you in the room. We want, we want you to step away for a little bit. So, hey, say you're on a medical sabbatical, and we'll kind of figure this thing out from here. You've done the groundwork. Now let us do the nuts and bolts. That's kind of what this thing looks like to me, Carlos. But I just can't imagine if I were a player that stuck around and was loyal. One of the bigger names, I'm talking about the Morikawas, the Schauffele's, the Scotty Schefflers of the world, okay? John Rahm. Those guys that stuck around and didn't take the big money, they have to, it's like a slap in the face to them to let these guys come back and play, don't you think?
Yeah, that that in itself is the biggest one, but I believe is the lost opportunity of business for themselves is really what this is driving this issue here. There's, okay, I didn't go, I didn't get the money, now I'm never gonna get it. And like you were mentioning about Patrick Cantley, I don't have a way to get it now. Now, what is it being offered that is gonna come, like Jay Monahan has been saying to them, but we still don't know what it is that they are actually gonna be better with this. Of course, because there's gonna be the way to offer the money that is being promised to them so far, moving, because they're not gonna have to be spending the money on those lawsuits and all that. You want to say something?
Yeah, I do. A couple things. I talked to a friend of mine yesterday, and he happened to play golf with a PGA Tour player that's retired now and doing other things, okay? And he absolutely hates the PGA Tour administration. He was kind of a fringe player, okay? On tour for several years, but never one of the big names, okay? He would keep his card. He was a popular player, but he does not feel that the administration looks out for the PGA Tour players. And, it's touted that the PGA Tour is owned by the PGA Tour players, right? But they didn't even know about this. They had no say in it. And so who's really running the show here, okay? Who's the head zookeeper, which appears to be Jay Monahan, making all these decisions, and the players are left out? It's got to be a lot of hurt feelings, Carlos.
It does, and it comes back to where it all started, right? With Phil Mickelson talking about the PGA Tour being greedy and all these other things that he was saying. So it has to be something, when the river is sounding, is because water is coming. So there's something going on, but at the same time, there's also some other roadblocks that they have to go through, because there's this hearing that is starting on July 11th. So the DOJ, the Congress, are going to start looking into all this. Is there anti-monopolistics laws that are going to be broken here? And the funny thing to me is that Congress, or at least some members of Congress, I'm not going to say everybody, but some few members of the Congress, when the lawsuit against the PGA Tour came, which was basically, oh, they're just a monopoly right now and they can do it. Now there will be even more monopoly. So what is the argument that the PGA, I mean, that the government, whichever entity is going to be looking at, what are they really looking at?
You know
Because
what they
now
want.
it's even worse.
You know what they want. The PGA Tour is tax exempt. Okay, they're a charity. They want tax money of the billions of dollars that the PGA Tour generates every year. You know what they want, right? The answer to every question, Carlos, is where's the money going? Okay, that's the answer right there. So but I really don't think I would be very surprised if the DOJ stops this deal. I just think it's kind of out of their purview. It's not really an issue that should be brought before them. But you've got, in addition to the Department of Justice, you have the Senate involved, and you also have the EU, okay? The European side of this thing. Does the European government, do they step in and say, hey, wait a minute, let's pump the brakes here a little bit. Let's take a look at this thing. Is this really good for the European community as a whole? Now, I don't know why it wouldn't be, but, it may cause some delay and, some discussion, all that kind of thing. So I don't know, Carlos. There are different steps that this thing's going to have to go through as it goes up the ladder. I don't see the DOJ or our government blocking this deal. Do you?
No, not at all. I think this is just going to be a show of front here for some of the politicians really that are getting into this. I really haven't heard or read that this is getting any more traction than those who proposed this to get this hearings done. The DOJ really has nothing to do here because there's no lawsuits. There's nothing there that they have to get into to intervene into this. On the contrary, right now the lawsuits were dropped. So that takes us to the other point is, now that the lawsuits are stopped, what will happen if all of a sudden that what we've been saying is not going to happen and the PGA Tour says, oh, you know what, it's not going to happen, we're not going to do this. What do you think is going to happen? Because to me, it's okay, none of this, we're going to go back to war. Everything's going to be back to the war words, and you are not good to me, and all hell is going to break loose again.
If the DOJ, so let's say that they lose their tax exempt, the PGA Tour loses their tax exempt status, okay? So where does that money to pay the taxes come from? Number one, they raise sponsors fees. Well, they're already pretty big. They're $10, $15 million to put on a tournament, right? So our sponsors going to, rebel against that. Number two, purses will have to be smaller. So you'll have to take 15% or 20% off of the purse. So instead of $10 million purses, maybe they only be $8 million purses. So who suffers? The players. Okay. So that's the only two places I see to pay that tax money, either from the sponsors or taking it from out of the players' pocket from the purse money. So I don't think those are really good things for a Congress or a government to be taking money out of people's pockets like that. So long term, I just don't see antitrust being an issue. Because of the nature of the business and the charitable nature of it. If they continue all the money they give to charity and raise for charity, I don't see how they can do anything, Carlos.
So we still are not knowing anything. There's still much to be decided. We know for certain that there has to be two things: definitive agreements happening, or maybe an extension to get this done. Because if none of those come by January 1st, 2024, then we don't have anything in place. But I think a lot of the things were going to get started to be revealed with this July 11th hearings, because that's where then they're gonna start making all these questions that we have are gonna be put on the floor, and they're gonna have to start answering. But at the end of the day, like you're saying, the players are set to lose a lot if they don't let this go. Yes, they're gonna have hurt feelings right now. They're gonna say I'm betrayed and all that, but at the end of the day, they're set to lose a lot more if this doesn't go through.
Yep, I agree 100%. Everybody can puff out their chest and beat their chest and, spout off all the rhetoric they want to, but at the end of the day, I think this is probably going to be a done deal.
Yes, indeed. Well, any final words before we close this?
No, it's it always gives us something to talk about. So I'm sure in a couple of weeks we'll know more and we'll be back and we'll have more information for you. But this is what we know so far, guys.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us. It's always our pleasure to bring you the latest in golf news and information. Remember to subscribe to the channel and look down there in the information. See you next time. Thank you.